The gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Jordan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. At a memorial event for David Hamburg, Speaker Pelosi and I had a chance to discuss impeachment. Mr. Dean, who wrote that?
I did.
1 month ago, May 11th, 2019, haven't we been too long in not giving Trump a meaningful moniker? Should it be deranged Don, deadbeat Don, demagogue Don? Thoughts, please, comments. Mr. Dean, who wrote that?
I assume that was mine.
It was yours. 19 days ago, May 22nd, 2019, there was this. We are witnessing Trump's massive cover-up of his criminal behavior. As POTUS, he is incapable of accomplishing anything. Mr. Dean, you know who wrote that?
I suspect that was me again.
It was you. I want to focus on that last sentence. As POTUS, as President of the United States, he, Donald Trump, is incapable of accomplishing anything. When you made that statement, Mr. Dean, what did you have in mind? You thinking about the 3.2% economic growth rate we had the last quarter? Thinking about the fact we got the lowest unemployment in 50 years? How about the fact the hostages are back from North Korea? Maybe you were thinking about this. When you said the President of the United States was incapable of doing anything, were you thinking about the fact that the embassy is now in Jerusalem? I mean, I think about this one. Every single candidate for as many cycles as I can remember, Republican and Democrat, have promised the American people, you elect me, we're going to move the embassy to Jerusalem. And guess what? They get elected and they come up with a million reasons why they can't do what they said they were going to do. But this president didn't. The embassy is now in Jerusalem. So I'm just wondering, what were you thinking about when you said he's incapable of accomplishing anything?
Mr. Jordan, I think that under the parliamentary rules of the House, I'm refrained from addressing a full answer to your question.
You weren't refrained in your tweets and your comments and the things you wrote.
My tweets are not subject to the parliamentarian.
They are subject to state of mind and the perspective you bring to this hearing, and I think the American people understand. Let me ask you this then. Did you give advice to Lanny Davis or Michael Cohen prior to Mr. Cohen's testimony to Congress?
No.
Well, you said on Aaron Burnett's show the night before Mr. Cohen testified in front of the Oversight Committee that Michael Cohen should, you said you had talked to Lanny Davis and that Michael Cohen should hold his testimony as long as possible from Republicans. You didn't say that to Mr. Davis? You said it on Aaron Burnett's show the night before Mr. Cohen testified.
I didn't say it directly to Mr. Cohen was your question.
No, it wasn't. My question was, did you give advice to Lanny Davis or Michael Cohen prior to Mr. Cohen's testimony to Congress?
Yeah, I have known Lanny Davis for almost a couple decades, and we have talked about it. And I did say, as soon as you turn your testimony over, it will be picked apart.
So you instructed Michael Cohen's lawyer to keep information from Republicans to obstruct the committee work that we were doing in the Oversight Committee just a few months ago? You told that to Michael Cohen's lawyer?
I didn't quite phrase it that way, no.
You know what? They took your advice.
I'm sorry?
They took your advice.
Did they?
Yeah. Mr. Cohen kept his testimony from us for as long as possible. But you know what else Mr. Cohen did that day? Lied. Lied 7 times. And this is what I think concerns so many Americans. This is what concerns, I think, so many Americans about the work that's going on in this Congress, this 116th. The first announced witness of the 116th Congress is Michael Cohen, the guy who sits in prison today for lying to Congress. Today, Chairman Nadler brings in front of the Judiciary Committee a guy to talk about obstruction of justice who went to prison in 1974 for obstructing justice.
I did not go to prison.
Okay. You pled guilty to obstruction of justice. I'm glad you got to stay out of prison then, I guess. What bothers me the most, though, is this committee's failure to investigate how the whole Trump-Russia thing started. This is the Judiciary Committee. We're supposed to, how this whole thing began. And I said this a few weeks ago, but I want to remind this committee what the Attorney General of the United States said 8 weeks ago when he testified in front of the Senate. He said 4 important things about the beginnings of the Trump-Russia investigation. He said there was a failure of leadership at the upper echelon of the FBI. His words, not mine. Upper echelon. That's certainly true. Comey, McCabe, Baker, Strzok, Page, they've all been fired, demoted, let go, they're gone. Some of them are under investigation by the Justice Department. He said spying did occur. He said it twice. He said there's a basis for his concern about the spying that took place. And he used 2 terms that, again, I think this committee should find frightening and should be looking into. Unauthorized surveillance and political surveillance. Scary terms. So the good news is, even though this Congress has memorandums of understanding between the key committee chairmen on how they're going to coordinate their attack on the president, even though this Congress, first big witness, first big hearing, Michael Cohen, a guy who sits in prison for lying to Congress, and even though we now have a guy testifying about obstruction of justice who pled guilty to obstruction of justice, we should be looking into the things Bill Barr's looking at. Now, the good news is Mr. Durham's doing that. But this is the part I think that frustrates so many. Mr. Chairman, I would hope the Judiciary Committee and the history this committee has for protecting fundamental liberties would begin to look into those key issues, the whole premise for how this Trump-Russia investigation started in the first place. And I'll finish again with this. Emmett Flood wrote a letter to the Attorney General a few weeks back, made an important point. He said we would all do well to remember, if they can do it to a president, imagine what they can do to you and me. Imagine what they can do to regular citizens across this great country. That should be what this committee most safeguards and most protects. And instead, we got memorandums of understanding between the chairmen. We got Michael Cohen testifying for 7 hours, getting advice from the witness here on obstructing the committee work and not sharing the information with us in a timely fashion. And now we got John Dean, 45 years ago, pled guilty to obstruction of justice, and now coming in to enlighten the Judiciary Committee on obstruction of justice when we could be going right to the start of how this whole thing started. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. Before I go to the next witness, I want to point out that this committee has no memorandum of understanding with any other committee with reference to any investigations. So I don't know. I don't know. This committee has no such memorandum of understanding, and I'm not aware of any others, but there may be. But this committee has no such memorandum of understanding. And number two, since the gentleman from Ohio cast aspersions on the witness, I would remind everyone that after Mr.
No, I didn't, Mr. Chairman. I read his statements. I did not cast aspersions. I read his statements.
Very well. Since I believe the gentleman cast aspersions...
You're wrong.
Fine. Since I believe the gentleman cast aspersions on the character and truthfulness of the witness, I would remind everyone that after exhaustive testimony in 1973, when the tapes were revealed, it was revealed that everything that Mr. Dean said was correct and truthful. The next witness...
Mr. Chairman, if I could.
The gentleman from Georgia is recognized.
Thank you, Mr.
Gentleman from Georgia is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Dean, relatively early on in the Nixon cover-up, you told the president that there was a cancer on the presidency, and then you came forward and blew the lid off of the whole cover-up. Then you pleaded guilty. You paid your debt to society, and since that time you have been an exemplary individual committed to truth, justice, and protection of the rule of law, and for that I want to thank you for your service to our country.
Mr. Malcolm, I have the appointment of Special Counsel Mueller, the one-page document that makes it happen on May 17th, 17, signed by Rod Rosenstein. In there he says the last point, item D, section 600.4 through 600.10 of Title 28 of the Code of Federal Regulations are applicable to the special counsel. And 600.8c says this: at the conclusion of the special counsel's work, he or she shall provide the Attorney General with a confidential report explaining the prosecution or declination decisions reached by the special counsel. As I read that, it seems to me that the special counsel was either supposed to prosecute or decline to prosecute. Not say, I can't decide. Not say I can't decide because there's a OLC opinion at the Department of Justice. He's supposed to pick one or the other. Do you read it that way?
Yes, I do.
And you said that in your testimony. I think your written testimony, I don't know if you said that in your statement, but in your written testimony you said it was the duty of the special counsel to provide the Attorney General with the confidential report explaining what I just read, the prosecution or declination decision reached by the special counsel. So you think Robert Mueller failed to do his duty in making a decision?
That is my opinion.
Okay. Mr. Malcolm, just let me go back to where we were a few minutes ago. In the Mueller report, it says, our report does not conclude that the president committed a crime. It also does not exonerate him. I'm trying to figure out how that squares with Title 28 of the Code of Federal Regulations impacting special counsels, where we read before, the Attorney General shall provide a confidential report explaining the prosecution or declination decisions.
Well, I don't think that it does, in addition to the fact that I don't think that it is any proper standard for any prosecutor to decide whether or not somebody has been exonerated. That's not the role of a prosecutor. It's not even the role of a jury. If a jury comes back and acquits somebody, it just says that they weren't found to be guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, not that they were factually innocent.
And it specifically says, when you read the section of Title 28, it specifically says the prosecution or declination decision reached by the special counsel. It doesn't say you don't have to decide at all. It says you got to pick one, and yet in his report he says our report does not conclude either way.
I read it the same way you do.
Okay. Now, why was he able to reach a decision, though, on one and not the other?
That you would have to ask him. He obviously felt comfortable with the state of the evidence. My guess is that his team was conflicted as to what to do, but that's reading tea leaves, and I don't read tea leaves very well.
All right. Mr. Malcolm, I'm going to go back kind of where Mr. Armstrong and Mr. Stubbe were earlier this afternoon. Does the president have the right to fire people?
Yes.
Does the president have the right to pardon people?
Yes.
Could a lawful action like a pardon or firing an individual be done with corrupt intent and therefore be criminal?
It could be done for an improper purpose, again, but the president has plenary power to exercise a pardon.
Could a lawful action with corrupt intent be could that be obstruction of justice?
Under certain circumstances, with certain people, yes.
Okay. And could a lawful action with corrupt intent be criminal even if there is, in this situation, no underlying crime?
Sure.
Okay. But it seems to me, what if there's no action?
Well,
so I mean, I keep coming back to this. Did the president fire Bob Mueller?
No.
Did the president fire Rod Rosenstein?
No.
Did the president pardon Paul Manafort?
No.
Did he pardon Michael Flynn?
No.
Did he pardon Michael Cohen?
No.
Did he pardon Roger Stone?
No.
Did the president stop people from testifying?
Not so far as I know.
Did the president's chief of staff testify? Reince Priebus?
2 of them.
Yeah, 2 of them. Did the president's White House counsel, Don McGahn, testify?
Yes.
For 30 hours.
So I'm told.
Did the president do anything to stop Bob Mueller getting access to the information he sought access to?
Not that I'm aware of.
Did Jeff Sessions unrecuse himself?
No.
I don't know if that's a word, but it's been used a lot here today. No.
And I don't think there's anything improper in asking him to consider it.
Yeah. Here's my point. When you, in my judgment, when you sum this all up, the president was falsely accused. Do you keep looking at something Bob Mueller chose not to indict, or do you investigate how the false accusation started? That's the fundamental choice for the House Judiciary Committee.
That's for this body to decide.
Oh, I understand. I'm not asking you a question. I'm making a point now. I'm actually directing my comments now to the chairman of the committee. I mean, Bob Mueller.
The gentleman yield for an answer.
When I got my 2 minutes and 43 seconds, maybe I'll let you answer. You get all the time you want because you run the committee. But when the president's falsely accused, Bob Mueller says he's not going to indict. The Attorney General of the United States says they're not going to prosecute, not going to indict. Do you keep looking at that? Or maybe do you want to look at how the whole darn thing started, how the whole false accusation began in the first place? Seems to me, particularly when we're talking about something as critical as the FISA court and the potential to violate people's fundamental liberties as could happen at the FISA court, and the evidence we already have seen, seems to me that's what you want to look at. But this committee says, nope, we're not going to do that. We're going to keep going and looking at something Bob Mueller and the Attorney General of the United States have already looked at.
Several members have said